2021. And we are calling to order the Village of Lake Bluff's Finance Committee meeting. Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Chair Inkeman
Here?
and Member Ryder.
Here.
Have a quorum.
Great.
Member Rappin is absent.
Thank you. The first item of business is the approval of the minutes from our September 13th, 2021 meeting. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second? Are there any corrections or changes?
No, I had no corrections.
All right, I had a minor correction that was updated. So just a voice vote?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. The next item on the agenda is if there's any not on the current agenda, if we have any visitors who would like to address the committee on any matter that is not listed on the agenda. Do we have anyone either in person or online?
We have one person online, but they're not indicating they are looking to speak at the moment.
All right. All right, so we'll just continue with our business discussion items, the first of which is a discussion regarding the 2021 property tax levy estimates. And Bettina has put together quite a bit of information here, a number of schedules and a memo. Would you like to give us some highlights, Bettina?
Sure. Let me share the screen. Oh, I can't do that. I'm not in the Zoom.
I got it.
We're glad you're here in person.
Yes, rather have you.
We'll take a couple technical glitches to have you in person.
I'm just looking at that first chart on the,
The colorful chart.
the page, on the second page of the memo that shows all the historical data from 12 to
Yep.
23.
Yeah, I'm there.
That's interesting. So how will they share? I'm not gonna figure it. Might be tough.
This chart?
Fantastic.
Yep, thank you. So the village levies in dollars rather than specific tax rates, and as a result, the village does not receive additional dollars if the assessed valuation of property in the village increases or decreases. Rather, the amount of the tax levy remains the same, and the spread over greater or lesser total assessed valuation of property. So which is a result in a decrease or an increase in the actual tax rate. So again, for this year, the EAV decreased, as it did in the prior year for the first estimate that the county provided us. And last year, it actually decreased a little bit more from that first estimate, so we can assume that it's probably fairly accurate in the calculation as far as the assessed value is concerned. So there are three methods of levy calculations that we look at each year. The first being that using CPI, then not using CPI but the current EAV, and the third is just a flat-out freeze. So if you go to attachment A, I think, Jane? Can you go to the bottom portion and just make it bigger?
Is that page 12? Yeah, I'm there.
So the lower part of this page, section 3, go down a little bit more, gives a nice summary of attachments A, B, and C, insofar as what the dollar amounts are with CPI, without CPI, and the freeze. And you can see that with CPI, we're looking at actually still a reduction to the general fund of $15,718 and an increase to the police pension levy for a total increase of $62,117. If there is no CPI and we use the changed EAV, we're looking at 13,461 for a total gain. Again, mostly going to police pension. And then with the freeze, we're obviously not gaining anything, but general fund will lose about $77,000. So those are the three choices that we've historically discussed in the past. I don't know if anyone has any questions about those choices this year. Each of them seem to be somewhat of a loss to general fund. You can look at, if you go to the other chart that summarizes, that would be D. Gives you a snapshot view of the assumption that we would take CPI and what dollars go to each corresponding general fund, IMRF, Social Security, police pension, and the library portion of the levy.
So I had a question, just in general,
Uh-huh.
you know, with some of the variables that go into the calculation, the first one being the EAV, the, you know, assessed value, and that number has decreased for a second year. And when you see property, you know, values seemingly rising, and the EAV going down, how do we reconcile those two?
I wish I could share my screen, Drew. How does that happen?
Where do you want me to go, Tina?
Oh, I have it, like, on my desktop, I have the breakout from last year and this year to answer your question,
Oh,
but I don't know how I
can you
get.
just email it to Drew quickly, and then Drew could put it up?
Is it the EAV question?
Well, it's the county's EAV calculation, and it shows where the differences lie in the breakouts between
Oh, it's
senior
separate.
freeze exemption and what some of the changes were.
Okay.
But are you asking it relative to demand and the market price?
I'm saying that that seems to be, you know, a logic question of how could the EAV go down when, in general, this goes up? And so, you know, if you can't put up the detailed numbers, it's just kind of a general concept question.
Sure. It's not always related to the assessed value or property value of a particular home. So if senior exemptions and freezes go up substantially compared to the prior year, that's going to affect EAV too. And we're so close to the prior year number that those are all factors.
Right.
The overall EAV did go down in addition to that also, and I think that's due to the commercial sector. That's seen some reassessment, because a couple years ago, remember, they went out and did this big assessment and raised everybody's numbers in the commercial sector.
Right.
And since then, I think there've been a lot of requests for reassessments.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's why. Do you want me to send that to you, Drew?
Sure.
So Bettina, you said that because the EAV has decreased in 2 consecutive years, that tells you that that's a good read on where things are. It's not anomalous, in other words.
Right, yeah. It isn't just an estimate on their part as like an informal one. It comes on their formal estimated. In prior years, I've asked for reporting early, and that's been somewhat informal. And then comes the formal county assessment estimate, and that's what I'm basing this one off of.
And you mentioned how it interplays with the commercial sector. Can you explain that a little bit more in terms of how our decision might be impacted by that out there? Because it wasn't assessed for a really long time, and then it was.
Well, basically, I think it was last year or the year before, the assessor reassessed most of all of actually,
Right.
the Lake Bluff properties, and the commercial properties came back with much higher numbers. And that levy came through with those assessments increased. And then since then, there were a lot of protests and reductions to those numbers.
So it's people appealing the assessment
Right.
and,
Right.
To
Oh, I've
some-
had, a long
yeah.
conversation with Scott Helton about what's going on with everything, but he mentioned certain sectors of town, looking at like the terraces versus other parts of town with regard to EAV. Do we break it out that specifically, or is he just doing
No.
that for his own purposes?
I could get numbers that are broken out there, but this reporting doesn't. It's just based, assessed value. And did you get it, Drew?
Drew, did you receive the schedule?
I did
that?
not.
Well,
It breaks it out by general EAV, then homestead, and the various reductions that you could qualify for, and then
Well-
comes to a total EAV, and then it adds on new construction and gives you the taxable number.
right. Well, and I think it's important just to know that, in the big calculation, it's dollars over EAV, and so that there's a numerator and a denominator, and the EAV just is a way to spread that total number. And so it's just a way to allocate the same number of dollars.
Right.
Another question I had related to the CPI, the factor that is reported of 1.4% that we're using. Is that a number that's set? We know what it is, that's what it's going to be?
It is set.
And, we've heard a lot about, prices changing and kind of, maybe even saying the I word, the inflation and things like that. How does 1.4% sound like it incorporates all that, or is it kind of lagging behind? And so if
No,
some,
so it lags behind. It's based on the December year-end number. And that number is what everyone uses as the formal, because that's what they put out, is
Right.
1.4.
so it might be that next year, the CPI will kind of jump a little bit, but for now,
Right.
this is the number. That's not going to change.
Right, absolutely.
And and the question is, so the 1.4 represents what happened in the last 12 months, and when we go to the next 12 months, let's say there would be a big jump, that new number would reflect what happened? Okay,
Correct.
all right.
Yep.
Thank you.
Sure.
Are there any other questions?
I had just a couple questions. Do we have any idea what the library might be asking? I know in here it says that we haven't received anything from them yet, but has anyone talked to,
So I have, but he hasn't given me an inclination as to what they're looking to ask for. I think it's probably him that's on the line, right, Drew? He said he was going to join the meeting.
He's on the call.
My guess is they're just looking to make sure that, that we ask for the number and not like in years past where it's been frozen. And then they've asked additional. on
yeah,
their
I
own.
feel like they're getting ready to do some capital improvements over there. That's why I was asking if they had some requirements that they were working with this year.
Yeah, he hasn't,
His hand is raised. If you
Okay,
hand is raised.
would you
allow him to talk.
activate the hand?
The hand. Eric?
I'm here.
Hey,
Can
hey.
you hear me?
Yes, sir. Welcome.
Excellent. Good to be here. I love these hybrid meetings. Pop over even when I'm holding on the fort over at the library. So, as far as the library's levy for the next year, the first finance committee meeting is scheduled for next week, next Tuesday. So we haven't met yet to discuss regarding what will be going in front of the finance committee. We're pretty well on track with our plan for replenishing our capital reserve project. So I don't anticipate that being something that would drive up the levy, the rate for next year significantly. And for the capital plans that we're working on for the renovation of the children's department, we're looking to do that with fundraising. We're in the process of launching a capital campaign and having conversations with philanthropic individuals in the community. So that shouldn't impact the rate either. I would be, can always happen. The trustees are the final authority, but I would be very surprised if we ended up with a requesting an increase higher than CPI, not CPI, the PTEL rate. I don't see us going above that.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I just had a quick question about the police pension. The amount that we're contributing for the police pension, I think we've been over this before. That's a number that's given to us, or is that a number that we as a village come up
So
with?
that's the actuarially calculated number that should be required to meet the 2040 requirement. So they calculate the number, the pension board approves it, and then they'll formally include that request at the board meeting.
Okay.
So,
And so it looks like from 20 to 21, we went from 54% funded to 63% funded. Going into May of 2022, where are we hoping to be? We don't know.
so there's a
That's
lot
kind
of
a fuzzy-
variables in that calculation, and it depends on a lot of where investments end up at the end of May 2022.
Okay.
There's some factorization for mortality tables, and interest rate returns and all the calculations that the actuary performs that drive that percentage. Assuming that we're on track and the way things have been, you know, it could increase, but we all know the market rebounded tremendously, and that's not likely to continue.
Okay, okay, I know there's,
We could see a leveling off, is what I'm.
we're trying to meet a certain threshold, correct? Like by, what was, is it 2040?
So by 2040, it should be 90% funded.
And I think the actual percentage as of the valuation on May 1st was 65%, 65.03.
Thank you, sorry.
Yeah, there was some confusion about that, though, at the last meeting, that it was and it wasn't.
Well, yes, there was.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's still in a red zone. It's not, I mean, I'm sorry, I know you don't appreciate when I say that, but it's a fact. It's just an indisputable fact. So I am hung up on this because I think we're getting there, but a market correction will take us right back where we were. So I think we need to be mindful of that. And to think that it isn't gonna happen is magical thinking. So my point is there a way to, I just feel like we could do more. I'm not hung up on actuaries. That's great. That's a baseline for me. And I'm just curious to know why we don't push for more. I would think we
So-
would want more going in there and to increase that and take in corrections. Actuaries give us statistics or they give us a view based on they're statisticians, basically, right? They extrapolate data from that.
Right.
But I guess my question that I just keep wrestling with, and a lot of people ask me, is why is it still there? And if we have that 7% return on more investment, then we are growing our portfolio. So I get the rationale, but I don't want to get too hung up on the actuaries because that loses sight of our goal to do more and to do better for these people.
Let me ask a couple of questions, because as I understand it, due to long standing tradition or expectation, we do not tax beyond the CPI, the PTEL limit that we would be bound by were we not a home rule. So assuming that is where we are at a maximum, anything we put toward the police pension would have to come from some other place, right? I am concerned about police pension, but I'm also very concerned about the imminent expenditures we have for infrastructure. Oh my gosh, I don't have my mask on. I apologize.
We were eating, so it was okay.
I was eating, oh, okay. I'm very, also concerned about the infrastructure spend. And so if we tax to the levy that's proposed here, which I would propose as the PTEL limit with full CPI, with full additional building, I don't know how
Taking
you
the
refer that.
EAV. You mean taking the
Taking the,
new
taking,
construction?
growth.
Right,
new construction, that's the word.
right.
Which I would propose at that number, which I think is the top line number that you've referenced in some of these charts. What color was it?
Green.
Color green. Then I don't know what more there is to talk about, except whether we're going to put that money immediately into the bucket that is got capital labeled on it, or we're gonna put it over here to the bucket that is police pension. And my way of thinking is we want to keep the flexibility that we need and meanwhile be in compliance. I agree with you, a correction could take us back to where we were. I completely agree with you, but I think maintaining flexibility with our ability to put the money to capital that we know we're going to need is our best position.
Well, and also the market appears to be, higher right now, especially relative to the prior year. And so we would be putting in when everything's at a very high level. And then when that market correction happens, as, there will be corrections, then that value will be less. Yes?
I have a question about that, actually. I mean, did I get this right, that we had a swing of from 54% to 65% in the last?
In 1 year's time, with the contribution that was
Yes.
you made and the change in the market valuation, at that snapshot in time.
Because that's
But those aren't the only variables. I mean, the actuary is also, I mean, in terms of putting in what is our calculation, there are all these other variables that, you know, the tables of, you know, when people are going to, how long they're gonna live and da-da-da-da. So,
So my real question was, so 54% to 65%, I mean, there is the actuary numbers, there is the investment we have made since then in the last 12 months, and there is the market fluctuations. So I would think that the lion's share is the market and stability for about 12
certainly the
months.
gain,
It is.
yes.
And
Yes.
so it's a big change. 54, my investment don't change that much. And so the question to you is there a way we can actually, instead of having swings like that, having a little bit more conservative investment, or making sure that we don't fluctuate that much, or we guard against negative adversity? I mean, negative change.
Yeah, so in terms of, there's a lot to unpack there. Exactly. But, and I think what's been talked about is having a joint meeting with the police pension fund, and that would be very helpful, I think, for everyone to have that conversation, to have the actuary there and talk about this path and our target to reach the 2040 goal, and talk about, there are some, I think, assumption changes that they want to talk about, and that would be a great time to have that conversation, and specifically talking about the assumptions for return on investments, one of the things they want to talk
Well,
about.
yeah, but I think to Susan's point, that the question is, what do we not do? I asked this question at the outset of the conversation about the improvements made in Scranton. If we do this, what can we not do? And here's the answer. Every time we do something like that, we cannot do this. So the logic in investing is that the more you invest more often, the more return, and you miss the opportunity. So every dollar you don't invest is a dollar you don't get a return on. And so when you don't invest those dollars, you don't have the opportunity to get the return. Now, I know I've asked you this before, but just since we're talking about it, the investment portfolio is going to be controlled by the state of Illinois in short order, right, next year.
Yep.
So to your point, the conservative nature of it is going to be dictated by people, not us. We'll just be in charge of the amount.
Right.
So then we can have a conversation about, here's the investment portfolio, how do we want to move forward? I assume the risk profile is going to be relatively low because they don't want to lose taxpayer dollars.
I would assume so, but,
And I know that
that's
over
set
the years it's
statutorily.
changed.
right, it's statutory. There's only certain types
Right.
of investments
And
now.
that's changed. Oh, I know, because I've
Right.
talked to people that have previously served on pension boards, and things used to be the wild, wild west, and now it's changed considerably. So I think that, yeah, I just always think we can do better. That's all I'm saying. I think there's always a way to do better by the police. We need them, we appreciate them, we all do. And so I don't want to constantly be this thorn in everybody's side, but I just think it's important to always strive for better. And if we have to forego certain things that are wants as opposed to needs, then we all do that in our own lives,
Sure.
right? I mean, that's
So
just,
last week, we had a police pension board meeting, and the actuary did present, and I did speak with them, and in preparing for what Drew's discussed as and asked her to run some scenarios, although I know they're actuarial, but in reducing the rate of return, extending the term, looking at different scenarios to determine what the payment schedule would look like and how that would affect the net end based on the current scenario. And she's going to work those through.
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember the last time some of the assumptions and the mortality tables were done. Maybe it was 4 years ago, something like that.
There's actually a tweak to mortality almost every year, if you look
There
at
was,
the valuations.
there was mortality and something else, but it was the conversation we had with the actuary and the police pension fund at that time was that we're gonna recommend doing some changes, and those changes were done, but it's like, you know, yes, you can go and adjust and fine tune all these assumptions, but you could get hammered, you know, and like your payments would explode. And so the idea was do a little bit at a time, like make a little bit of changes at a time. Again, keeping the eye on that long-term trajectory of reaching that 90% at 2040. You know, the idea is like you're gonna tweak these things a little bit all the time. And that with each time you do that, it's going to raise your required investment level. And so just being cognizant of that, in addition to any other additional funds the village would look to put into it. So just, I think that's the approach has been the 40-year look, you know, that kind of that, or 20-year now, I should say, but that's kind of the horizon that the village has been using. So, and they've talked about, again, from time to time, about should we be doing more, could we do more? And I think it always gets back to the trade-offs. Well, we have lots of other needs. And, you know, if we're on a path and we're being true to the 2040 path, we can at least be good and feel good about that. So I think that's what historically it's been.
So we do look forward to that meeting. We might see that at the end of 2021 sometime? Yeah?
We'll see what schedules look like. but yeah.
Okay, okay. And I think that's I appreciate all your questions, and those are some of the questions that everybody's asking. And we want to be able to present the information in understanding all the trade-offs that happen. And I think that'll be the best opportunity to do that, so. All right, any other further questions? I mean, we've had Susan kind of weigh in on the idea of PTEL and taking the CPI, and I'm of a like mind. I wish, you know, Steve were here to kind of share his thoughts, but I think that's kind of the flavor of what we were trying to do, is look at these estimates of the numbers that we're going to be receiving, and, you know, just feel comfortable at what we might want to do as a committee, which would be to recommend. At this point, Susan, is it correct to say that we would want to recommend taking the CPI and the full PTEL amount?
That would be my recommendation, yes.
Yes. And so do we need to have a motion for that? Yeah? Susan?
So moved.
I'll second it. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. The next discussion is regarding,
Yes. Yeah, you may be seeing on the screen that we've gone to subtitles. We're having a sound problem. So for those watching at home, which there are, good news. But they let us know that we're having sound issues, so we're adding this in. So
Oh,
if you
that's
see
great.
it, yeah.
so now we can see our words as well as hear them.
Yes.
Well, we will be forever remembered for everything that we say.
Yes.
Awesome.
Easier than reading lips, according to the person who just told me.
Oh, right, right.
Yeah.
Okay. On to our discussion regarding alternative revenue sources for stormwater infrastructure. And this really does kind of dovetail into what we were just talking about. You know, there's lots of things that we need to accomplish, and certainly our stormwater is a huge issue with the village, and given the last 24 hours of substantial rain, we probably have everyone nodding their head in the room and at home. So I'm going to turn to our presentation. And Bettina, do you want to kind of tee up the sources for stormwater infrastructure?
The sources
I
of,
mean, sources of funding.
sources of funding.
Yes, we know, yeah.
Sure, so in the packet, we included the presentation from CBEL that he'll be giving shortly. That obviously talks about the stormwater utility fees as a source of funding.
Right.
Also was included a timeline that we created. That gives you kind of an overlook of tasks and things and timing of what needs to be accomplished in order to meet that goal of implementing the stormwater utility fee. There's also inclusion of a possible transfer tax timeline that includes some of the legal things and outreach things that would need to be done to accomplish the transfer tax, and also some legal direction from our attorney with regards to that. I don't know how much detail you want me to give up front, but
So are we going to walk through the slide deck?
yes,
You know,
he's gonna give
okay.
a presentation first, that's why.
Fantastic.
I emailed it to you, Drew, because I don't know how easy it will be for them to share if they're not on the Zoom.
Is this what it looks like?
Yes.
It's in our packet, too.
Right.
Yeah. Hey, Jeff Hansen, Village Engineer Jeff Hansen, can you bring up the presentation from CBEL tonight? We're having some technical issues here, and I'm trying to juggle a couple other things.
Unless I just zoom in, you want me to just to do that?
No, he's acknowledging.
He's there?
Yep. Aren't you, Jeff?
He's acknowledging.
I am trying to, yeah, I'm having audio issues as well.
Oh,
Me.
great.
Pull that up, it's gonna take a couple minutes here.
Well,
I would do it faster.
I'll see your audio issues and raise you.
You just want me to go in there? I mean, okay, I'll just do it.
I'm gonna do it. I can collapse it. I don't see it.
But you open it on the web, you
Yeah.
open it on the real app. Okay. On
got?
Hi.
I'm in there. Couldn't solve
Here it
the
is.
problem.
Hannah's email just showed up.
Oh, okay, you're good?
Yep.
I'll leave.
Oh, no.
It didn't?
That's the EAV data.
Oh, okay, I'll go in, I can join and share. You want me to do that?
Yeah.
Okay. Glenn, can you give me sharing ability? I don't know if you heard me. No.
I got it.
You got the email?
Okay.
Okay.
So this is Thomas Burke from Christopher Burke Engineering, who presented a very similar, almost identical presentation almost a year ago. And Tom and Scott Griffith, an engineer specializing in stormwater, has helped the village over the last several years to do our various stormwater planning studies to help determine what improvements could be done to alleviate a number of flooding issues around the community. And so they're very familiar with our stormwater situation and have put together essentially that $40 million shopping list of stormwater improvements. And this presentation deals with ways to pay for those improvements, specifically dealing with the stormwater utility. Tom?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Drew. So we're going to look at the big picture. Why would you do it? What does it do? What does it accomplish? How do we come up with the numbers? And happy to answer any questions. So if we go to the next slide, why would we do a stormwater utility? And what do they use? So the first thing we have is Mpds, the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, Phase 2 requirements. An EPA unfunded mandate that was brought on many years ago, with the village meets requirements for that. That would certainly qualify for any funds you bring in through stormwater utility could be spent on that. Any owned waterways, ditches, creeks that the village owns, wants to maintain those, that could be used. Storm sewer maintenance, factor trucks, crews for that. Anything you're dealing with storm sewers that convey stormwater from one point to another, it could be also used for funds from the stormwater utility, as well as capital improvements. And that's really the largest one, and the reason most communities bring it is a way to pay for capital improvements. They're usually, have a laundry list, as Drew mentioned, and how is it to pay for them? The next slide, I think you just were asking about this, and I'm not gonna spend much time, but normally from stormwater perspective, when we do projects and bring it in and the funds aren't there, we either have a tax associated with it or a special service area. And this is what we're gonna talk about as a stormwater utility, where the utility is strictly for stormwater projects, stormwater funds. Otherwise, it's the general fund. So our concentration for the rest of this is we talk about stormwater utility. It's certainly a reliable source. It's based on a user fee. It is not a tax. It doesn't go on, typically doesn't go on the tax bill. It goes on it's a fee, which is an important difference of this utility. Because it looks at everyone's, in the case that we're talking about here, is everyone's impervious area. So if one residential parcel has a certain amount of impervious area, the roofs, the driveways, sheds, whatever you must have, that all contributes to runoff, right? And that runoff has to go somewhere. It goes in the village's storm sewers and out somewhere. Newer places might have a detention pond. Those detention ponds have to be upkept. Commercial areas, churches, everyone contributes stormwater, right? So it's assessed based on the amount of impervious area, which dictates how much stormwater you typically contribute. The stormwater utility can be raised and lowered, if you go back, sorry, it can be raised and lowered over time. We don't see many communities that will bring it back. I have seen it. Most of them, as more demand comes up, they will raise it, and I've seen that quite a few times. But as I mentioned before, it can be used for projects, maintenance, equipment, and staff. Next is, so this is nothing new. Stormwater utilities are nationally done. This is from a study that was done by Western Kentucky in 2021. And you can see there's a large area in the Midwest. Illinois has some, and we'll go over those. But certainly, if you look in some of our neighboring states to the north and northwest, as well as to the east, there are tons of stormwater utilities. Indiana has quite a few of them. The first one I'm aware of in the Chicagoland area is probably 30 years ago. It was one of the first communities that's developed a stormwater utility. But they're certainly used out east, south, out west. They're all over. So there's hundreds of thousands of them. Go ahead. Sorry, thousands of them, not hundreds of thousands, thousands of them. What's the process? The process is to look at what data we have, set a budget. What are you trying to accomplish? How much funds are you trying to get? And so we look at how many different residential parcels there are, how many non-residential parcels there are, and working out through the budget of what you're trying to collect, we come up with a rate. And that rate is usually a monthly rate that's assessed. And then the important part is to conduct education outreach, because there are people who say, well, this is just another tax. And there are certainly the ones that are tax exempt, the parcels in town that don't want to pay anything because they view it as, hey, we're tax exempt, we shouldn't have to pay a fee. Well, it is a fee, not a tax, and they contribute just as schools, churches, et cetera, contribute to stormwater just like everybody else does. So the education outreach is very important. Then the next thing is developing ordinances and policy statements, so that if somebody wants to come in and challenge it, there is a reason they have an ability to challenge it and say, I don't think this is fair, and let me see how I was determined for my property. And finally go through billing procedures and then program policies and procedures. But the part is to have, if somebody wants to challenge it, they have the backup information so that we can explain why this was done and how it was done. So let's look at some examples, and we're going to try and evaluate. Here's existing data that's out there. There's different programs in place. As I said, there's a lot of them in Illinois, and what we're trying to do is accomplish desired stormwater projects, not new water mains or anything else, not new police cars, but actually stormwater projects that are out there that have been. We know that there's flooding that goes on. How do you get those addressed? And so we have those. We have the GIS system, so we know every parcel, what the impervious area is, and we have to finally come up with a procedure to say, okay, this is how we're going to calculate it, this is how we're going to assess it, and this is the amount of funds we're trying to collect to come up with a final dollar amount. Drew, if you could, next. This is kind of a repeat, but we come up, we're trying to set that budget. What is that dollar amount we're trying to collect? And so working with staff, you have to determine, are there things outside of just projects that we're going to include? So the 6 minimum control measures, talking about the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, you have minimum control measures you have to achieve, education, outreach, et cetera. Staff, staff time will be, is there going to budget for that? Utility administrative costs, all those things can be included in there, but really most of it comes from the capital projects. Has a master plan been done? Does a master plan need to be updated? That fee would certainly be associated with any type of stormwater utility fee that's collected and any type of mitigation of flood studies. So if I'm just going to go through an example of how to determine the utility rate, which in this case we're going to use the term ERU, equivalent residential unit. Equivalent residential unit. So if I'm going to look at 3 different areas in Lake Bluff and say, how do I determine what the ERU is, or equivalent residential unit, on average for these different areas? And so we'll look at East Lake Bluff, Terraces, and Tangly Oaks. And all we're trying to do in each one is look at how much impervious area is on each parcel. So if you go forward, we'll look at one of them. Here's East Lake Bluff. We've taken 5 sample properties. We're doing it right next together because it's easier to show pictorially. What we do is take a sample of 5 inside of East Lake Bluff, 5 representative parcels. So here, take parcel 1, which is shown in the upper left of the picture. It has a rooftop area of 2,205 square feet, a non-roof area, so that basically the driveway and I can't tell if it's an outbuilding there, a shed or patio of 1,078. So a total of 3,283 square feet of impervious area for that lot. We do the same thing for parcels 2 through 5. Total them all up, you have about 15,000. The average then is 3,140 square feet for each one of those parcels. So you'd say that the average impervious, if this was representative of all of East Lake Bluff, the average impervious was 3,140 square feet for each property. That would be you would set your ERU at that. 1 ERU equals 3,140 square feet. If we go to the next one. One more. Terrace, looking at the terraces. So it's the same calculation. Here we have 4 parcels. We're going through the same calculation. How much rooftop, how much non-rooftop impervious area. We get a total, in this case, 3,281 square feet of impervious area for each of these parcels in the terraces. Recall that East Lake Bluff was 3,140, this is 3,281, it's a little bit more impervious area. If we go to the next example, which is Tangly Oaks, we go through the same calculation again. Here are 4 of them. We come up with 3,607 square feet. So you can see we have a little bit of variety now between, a difference between East Lake Bluff all the way to Tangly Oaks, about 500, a little less than 500 square feet. So the option then is to either look at each one individually, combine them all, and say for any of these single residential parcels, we're gonna just use 1 and average them. If we go to the next slide, it talks about the different options you have. So here's a summary. East Lake Bluff was 3,140 square feet. Terrace is 3,281. Tangly Oaks is 3,607. I don't mean to get into the math here, but there are some choices to be made because it will have an effect. So one option, I'm just going to start with the very bottom one, is to average option C, all 3, and say, okay, our average is 3,300 square feet for each ERU, each residential unit. Therefore, every residence inside of Tangly Oaks, Terraces, and East Lake Bluff would all be the same. You could say, well, I don't know if that's really fair. Let's use the denominator to say, well, if we take, since East Lake Bluff has the smallest number, 3,140, we'll set that as 1 ERU. And then the other 2 would be a factor of that. So in that case, Terraces would be 1.05, Tangly Oaks would be 1.15. The idea is not to go each individual parcel, but figure out residential, what you're gonna do. And then once you've set that, then you're gonna go to commercial. So there's 3 different options here as how you can do it just with this information. Commercial, once you set your ERU, whether it be, as we talked about, 3,300 or 3,140, once you've set that, then when you do the commercials, you would have to divide that by the total impervious area. So here we take an example of a site that has 23,000, almost 24,000 square feet of impervious area. Well, if I do an option A, my ERU is 3,140, it would have 7.6 ERUs. If I took it where I averaged all 3 of them together, it would be 3,300 ERUs. So this parcel with 23,824 square feet divided by 3,300 is 7.2 ERU. So a difference, there would be a difference in there. When you multiply that times dollars, there is a difference, but that's the way you would do for each one. For commercial though, you're looking at each one individually. You're not averaging them per a block, per commercial area or anything else. Each parcel is done individually. So I thought I'd give you some examples. In Illinois, we have right now about 30 municipalities that have ERU. There have been quite a few more that have studied it and have not quite gotten over or instituted it yet. And so on the left is the communities. The next one is the fee type. The next one is if they're doing an ERU, equivalent residential unit, that's the number they're using as their minimum 1 ERU equals. And then what the monthly fee is, the year it was created, and the population. So you see,
Could you describe what these fee types
I
are?
was just gonna get
Steve?
to
Oh,
So you
right,
see the
go
fee
ahead.
type has quite a variety, right? And so what you're gonna find is that people have done variations of what we're considering, so whenever you see E, that stands for ERU. But if you look at like the A is a fee per parcel of acres. So they decided to go off of acres, instead of parcel per acres, and do it, there's different communities in Illinois, some more rural, that might wanna do it differently. But T is a tier system, so it's not that different, but they've set it up as a tier system, so if you're like tier 1, 2, 3, they've set it up differently. And it might be based on the amount of impervious area. F is a fixed rate, where they're just saying, it's gonna be this much for every residential and this much for non-residential. As I said, there are many different ways, and we're gonna see, when we look later on, there's another one that's W for water. And unfortunately, the community I live in, it does it based on water usage, which has no relationship to how much impervious area I have. So but they've done it that way. So it's easier way to do it, but, so let's just go back, go back one more. So if you look at here, down one. If you look at this, you can see there's a range, right, from $2.61 in East Moline, but again, they're doing it on a tier system, to $13.48 in Downers Grove. Downers Grove established it in 2012. They just raised it in 2021, so this is reflective of what it is in 2021. So I believe when they started it in 2012, it was around $7 something an ERU, and they've gradually increased it. They have a lot of projects, a lot of flooding that they've done. This just gives you a sample. The next one shows another sample from Highland Park to Park Ridge alphabetically. You can see that probably the majority of them are ERU, but each one does it differently. There's Northbrook that I was talking about with $1 per water. And I tell you, when you get a leaky toilet, you get really upset because you realize that not only do you waste that water, now you're paying for it too in another way for stormwater. But you can see the population change, varies here. And here, you can't really compare water usage to ERU because it's not at all equivalent. But you can see a lot of the different costs per ERU in this table. You'll see some of the current ones, like Libertyville, has $13 per ERU. Park Ridge at first, actually, we helped them with their stormwater utility. They first approved it at $0, but since then they've actually started putting a fee towards it. So they have something now. But it was passed in 2016. I don't think it was probably until 2019 they actually put some dollars towards it. So they're at $2.75, and they have 2,800 as their minimum ERU. Next slide.
I had a quick question on that.
Yes.
How come the asterisk next to Libertyville? Did you mention that already?
So they are using the ERU system, but again, it's tweaked. So it's not a true just, hey, whatever, they have it, it's almost combined between the ERU and the tier system.
Okay.
That's why I should have put a footnote where it is, but it's tweaked. It's not straight ERU.
Thank you.
What I think of as ERU. All right, this is the last one that shows, again, some other communities out of the 3 slides showing the 30 communities in Illinois. You can see they range. You've got Peoria at $7.80, Rolling Meadows at $4.76, Wheeling, Winnetka $21.83. I will say that Rolling Meadows was one of the first communities to adopt the stormwater utility. If you ask them, one of the, you got Tinley Park was before, but in more recent times, the one mistake they made was they set the fee amount, and then they said we'll never increase it more than a small percentage each year. So what's happened is it's hampered them by actually getting projects done. People accepted the fact that there was a stormwater utility fee, and then they said, well, once you started collecting the fee, how come you're not doing my project? Because you're collecting the fee and I want my project done. And they just could not, because the way it was originally written, they could not increase it to get more projects done. So if they jumped to $5 a while ago, they could have actually gone ahead and done more projects. What we typically see is when you have this, right, it's set money coming in. We've worked with another consultant to see how much bonding can be done and figure out the projects that way. So if you have $40 million in projects, you're not typically doing that in 1 year. You space it out. when do we think that'll happen, work with them to figure out how much bonding has to happen, and ultimately what the ERU is. Yes.
So I would like to understand what the relevance of the ERU is in the particular example, if you would bear with me. So if you go back to Tangly Oaks, just because it's a wide variety there.
Sure.
Tangly Oaks, for example, has an average of 3607, and so you set the ERU at 3607 in Tangly Oaks. What does that mean for owner of parcel 4 and owner of parcel 1? They have very different size
Correct.
houses and impervious areas. So can you tell me, does parcel 2 pay 1.5 ERUs and parcel 1 pays 0.8 ERUs? I'm just trying to figure out what the relevance is then to the size of the particular house.
Sure. So in the case if the ERU is set at 3,600 square feet, resident 1 would be paying a lot more because they would be paying 1 ERU. So you're figuring out the average for, again, we're looking at different,
The whole neighborhood, so
either the whole
somebody-
neighborhood or all, I mean, there's different ways you can do it. You can break it down as much as you want. It's more timely, and then if you break it down where you're gonna look at every residential parcel, you can do it that way. Then you better make sure that every time someone puts on a deck or puts on any kind of changes, that gets changed through the system.
So that makes sense to me, although it seems like those who have less impervious area should pay less, but.
Correct.
When you say that these 30 towns, half of them have ERU fee types, can we assume that they have parcel 1 and parcel 4 paying the same amount?
Yes.
Or
Yes, 90% of them will have, now, if they're using the ERU, if they're using the water system, no.
Right, I understand, but roughly half of them are using, or
Correct, like,
2/5 of them are using ERUs. Are you saying that the way that all of them do that is with this, my example in Tangly Oaks, parcel 1 and parcel 4 would both be paying 1 ERU?
typically, that's the way it's set up. If you're in one subdivision, it's typically the same size lots and more or less the same size houses. That's the way it's set up. Now, it can also be, I've also seen it where it's set up for different zoning classifications. So each zoning classification, again, you can have a variance there. You can have one that has 2,850 square feet, another one has 4,800 square feet. But then you set it up per R1, R2, R3, et cetera. That's also very common to do. It's trying to get something that you try as fair as possible without going down to do every residential lot.
Yeah, although you're calculating every
You're calculating a
residential
sample right now.
lot in order to get to the ERU, so why not?
You're calculating a sample.
Well, it's just a sample.
Sample,
And
I
so,
see.
and so the idea is you can go to the minutia, but then you waste all your time trying to figure out, did somebody lay one brick? And it's.
Yeah, I got
So, anyway, Joy, you had a question?
I did. I was curious what the difference is between using an ERU and using a tiered system. It seems like there's quite a few communities that use a tiered system.
So there's some tier systems that say we're only gonna charge X amount for residential, so every residential pays the same. And then non-residential is gonna pay X amount.
Okay.
It's a very simplified, I don't think it's a very defensible way to do it, though. It's a simplified way to say, we have a two-tier system, you're the residential or non-residential, and it's gonna be one fee for each.
Does anyone, do any communities tier based on square footage amounts? Like, if you're within the threshold of 2,500 square feet, this is what you pay. If you're in 35, within this threshold of 35.
Absolutely.
I'm just trying
absolutely.
to, because to me, like, these numbers, it doesn't look, there's a
Equitable?
fairness component there. You know, the guy who's got 4,700 square feet versus 2,800 square feet. I I understand that's easier to average it and everything, but,
So I was doing this as examples, I said, how many homes are in Tangly Oaks? Does anyone,
yeah, a ton, right?
Right.
500.
175.
175?
Yeah.
So I was doing this because pictorially, if I try to show 10 samples through 175 it'd be harder to show. I just did it because it's easy to show that here's 4 of them. If there's 175, we would typically pick 10, and we're looking for the smallest and the largest, just by eye,
Right.
and then picking 10 and adding those up and sampling. You're still gonna get, but you're still gonna get something similar. We're gonna have some high and some low, right?
Yeah, I guess I just feel like there's a fairness component to the person with the smaller house.
Yeah.
Like, they're,
Well-
they're subsidizing.
I have a question. I'm
Yes.
completely confused on that conversation, and typically I'm not. I am, Tangly Oaks is 1985 or 1980, somewhere there, so it's kind of, everything was developed at once in 2 or 3 years. Great, thank you very much. If we go on the east side, you have lots, if you go on, toward the lake on, what's the
4
street?
acres.
The street on Union Church. At the end of the street, you have very tiny
Prospect.
lots. And those are 40 feet wide and not very long. You have other houses where there are 2 lots. So for example, I know that a house is on one of the lots,
Yeah.
and next door there is nothing, so how do you compute that?
Well,
And then
that-
you have a 60 by 140, that is the normal one. And how does it compare to everything else? It's probably like twice bigger than the smallest lot in Lake Bluff. So how do you put all that together?
So, and they're zoned the same classification?
Yeah.
It's all
R4.
All R4? So you can certainly look for, what we've done before is we've looked for anomalies, and you can separate those out so that it's more equally assessed. I'm not saying short of doing every one, there's no perfect way of doing it.
I mean,
tiered.
there's a big difference between the
Tiered makes
houses
more
on the,
sense.
what's
I'll
the-
give my own example of my own house. I have 3,000 square feet of impervious surface and an 18,000 square foot lot. So, and I have a 3,500 square foot rain garden. So my question was, I also have mitigation strategies. I don't see anything in here
For that.
about taking those into consideration, but I did do research, and Wilmette and Winnetka both require engineering studies, that it would be on my dime.
So,
So that's a big question for me. I think that President Charlot raises an excellent point, and I was gonna get to that with regard to the other category that's missing, our estates. Shore acres and others where they have 5 acres, they might have a 5,000 square foot lot on 5 acres, Crabtree Farm. So I think we would
house.
have to consider, I don't wanna waste too much time on this,
So-
but we would have to have a category for anomalous properties.
So,
I
but
think
what
this
I'm
was
saying
for
is,
illustrative purposes,
Right,
and we
but just
chose,
putting that out
but
there.
the point I'm trying to make is the variability is very high.
Very.
You have,
everyone acknowledges that it
and
is.
so in between Crabtree Farm or some houses on,
Just some houses, I mean, camp meeting houses are on, like you said,
Right.
40-foot wide lots. I think we'd
Well-
have to have a category for that that's not featured.
I'm just gonna do, like, pick the biggest one on this page, Winnetka, it's $20, $21 a month, times 12 months. So we're talking $240-ish dollars. I mean, this isn't no money, it's not a huge amount of money, but it is money. My point is, it's not going to be that someone's gonna suddenly get a 10,000, like Cape Breton, you're gonna get a $10,000 tax bill or a fee.
Oh, no, I know.
So I think just getting the idea that we're not here to say, what are you gonna do about this in each individual situation? We all know some of these situations, and we're gonna factor that in if we choose to go down this path and say, do we have enough one-offs that we wanna put those in a separate bucket? What are the different areas that we could group and meaningfully do that? And do we want to say if there's a variation of 25%-ish, then that is acceptable? We've got to figure out, because otherwise, we're going to have somebody spending a lot of time crafting something that would save one person $12 more and another person $12 less, and it's not meaningful, it's not helpful.
Well, Winnetka doesn't have the kind of commercial space we have, number one. 2, I don't know if you've worked with them, but I
have.
assume this number is a result of the number they came up with their deep tunnel project. And they're one of the smaller communities here. There's only one that is even close to our population. But Winnetka does, they can move their water to the lagoons, but also they don't have the commercial, in terms of equity, to your point.
Kate, before you continue, I mean, I think we need to acknowledge Barb for what you said, that is, the sums are small enough that variations of a few percent are not going to be that meaningful. This is what you're saying.
Well, what I'm saying is, we don't need to get hung up on this at this point, because just taking a ballpark
Okay,
of what
and
some
so-
of these fees are,
And
I think
so-
we need to get the big picture and create meaningful subsets so that if we were to enact this, we
Yes.
have subsets that are representative enough and people can live with that variation, just like, you know,
I get
everything
that.
has variation.
I get, but, and so what you say, Kate, is, what are you saying about these lagoons? I didn't get the.
That they were able to move water west, and we can't do that as easily because of continental divide. There's other issues. We don't want to get bogged down into engineering issues. But what I'm saying is that number, we have to back into that number. We have to determine what we're going to borrow. Also, the other thing is, that's not included here is debt service would be a way, we'd debt service a bond. So I think that like Northbrook is debt servicing.
Correct?
So I think that number, we can multiply it out, it comes to about $500,000 a year for the number of households we have, but that doesn't then include any commercial. But the reason that number is kind of misleading is because we have a lot of commercial properties that somebody like Winnetka doesn't have, and they're gonna be asked to pay their fair share. And I really wanted to explore that further, because we have some really big pieces of property out there, and how we would do that. So I have
Right.
I have a ton of questions.
Right,
I get
and
what, this
I
is
think-
supposed to be at 60,000 feet. but-
Exactly. So I think the idea is that we're supposed to understand based on these illustrations, this is what it means to have an ERU, and this is how you might categorize, and this is how you might tweak. And this is what it means to create a pot of, this is what we're trying to accomplish, these are the dollars that it would take to do that, and there are funding strategies of which this is one. So we're just looking at a piece. We're not trying to answer the question, we're trying to just understand how this tool could be used at this point.
Thank you.
Were there any other, I mean, I'm looking at our time here, we're at 6:38. And
Yeah.
I think that you've done, you know, a great job of, you know, flying at 10,000 feet and kind of explaining some of the different strategies. What are we missing so that we can then, from this point, go back and see what are some of the ways that we could take what you've given to us and apply it to Lake Bluff and our situations? What have we not thought about, or what have we not asked about?
So, you brought up the rain garden. There's, one of the things we typically recommend doing is having a credit manual associated with it. So if you have somewhere that has detention, provided detention, and it's up to code, they should get credit for that, because it's not all stormwater. The village has to handle it eventually, but it's not a burden as much as the places that don't.
Right.
So there'd be things like that would need to be done. Again, trying to say 60,000, I don't get the specifics of all those, but it's really, is this something that the village is interested in doing? Because then you can get to all those answers by doing the study and by getting,
Exactly.
here, you know, putting a pen and paper to have it, this is how it would work, this is how much money you'd have to get to accomplish. Yeah,
You done?
yes, I'm done.
This is just one piece of the puzzle, right?
Mhm.
Like, so we look at this, then we also look at debt service, we also look at grants, we also look at other funding sources, but this would be part of the pie. that we
This
would be
is
looking at.
one of the strategies that we're talking about, a stormwater utility tax, and this is how that tax would be applied to.
Utility,
Exactly.
utility, not tax.
I'm sorry.
I think that's an accurate word.
I guess from my perspective, from way up here, I'd like to, if we go down this road, I'd like to keep it as simple as possible, just knowing that staff is already very, very busy. And the more simple we can keep something like this, I think the better it is for staff, quite frankly.
Thank you for that, but I think one of the things we've talked about at a staff level, again, high level, is, you know, good ways to fit this into compartments and start narrowing it, getting more granular, starting with zoning district is a great place to start. And you can make it as a fine of an instrument you want, but that does come up with regular check-ins, because some of these communities that are doing, they have to check in with what regular, like annually sometimes, to see, well,
Correct.
who did added impervious surface, check the building permits, and you make adjustments annually, so it becomes a labor of love, right? But so we've talked about that internally and how to scale it and what we think is something that we can administer. And so if there is something that if this seems to have traction, it sounds like it does. I don't want to get too far ahead, but this is something that there's a timeline. This is something that we talked about with Chair Inkerman, was having a conversation about. This can be, there's a number of ways to get from point to point, but we wanted to put out at least here's a timeline you can react to. and see what it would take to have conversations. One of the things that the village could do is, one of the first things you see there under the policy considerations in this quarter that we're in right now is discuss a feasibility and rate study. That's something that a lot of communities end up doing, and that's going a little further depth than what we're doing here so far in terms of the engagement. We have Christopher Burke, but there's firms that will, like Christopher Burke, that can do that work and very specifically get into the level of designing the actual ECRUs and nailing that down. Those studies range from, Bettina, help me out here, $70,000 to $100,000. So that's another cost. If we want to do that, to drill down, that's another step we could do. Now, that's something that we talked about internally, about internal capacity to do work. We can do a lot of that work in-house. And we thought we could safely do it within the schedule that we showed you, rather than hiring an additional, any more than we have. We have expertise already to help us, but without investing to that level, we could get a lot of this done.
So you're saying that, you know, if we hired it out, it might be 70 or 100, but if we do it in-house, we could,
It could take longer, but we can do it in-house.
and that
With
shows
some,
that
with some
longer,
help here.
that
by
shows
this-
the longer time frame.
That's correct. That's what we showed here, the more
Right.
conservative timeframe.
Right. Well, I guess, Susan, I guess I would, you know, just kind of take the temperature of the only other finance committee member who is here. Do you feel like, given this time frame and given the discussion of what we've had so far in terms of how this might be calculated in broad terms, that this is something that we would want to look at further?
I do think we should look at it further, but I think this timeline is sufficient, that we ought not spend consulting money, if you will, to get it done
To
more
speed
quickly.
it up? Yeah. All right, so do we have a motion to recommend that staff, you know, spend some time to try to meet this timeframe and look at some of, you know, the first step would be to just kind of look at a feasibility and rate study?
I think you told us not to do that.
Well,
But-
you're saying that's the one that we would hire?
That's the one, right, yeah. I think there's sufficient direction. I don't think we need a motion. I think if the direction is to keep moving, and we'll come back at the next step and talk about narrowing this down, saying if we're gonna do an actual rate analysis, we can do that, start working towards that path, and come back to you next, say, based off everything we've talked about and the directions we've heard to date, we think this is a reasonable approach, and you guys can edit that.
Right.
To include things like, starting with looking at it through the lens of the zoning district to account for the things that were brought up here tonight, concerns, and then also look at credit and start kind of putting that together.
Okay. I feel comfortable with that, and, you know, the more information we have, it seems like more questions we have, so I think that more
Yeah.
information would be better for us
And
to
and
move
it's,
forward.
and it is, Trustee Brian brought up, I mean, all this backs into the idea of doing a bond in a scale that the village could support, and looking at, if we did a $10 million issuance over a 20-year period, what can we do to cover the debt service? And that's why the next slide, let me get to it, we've talked about this as another means. We're talking about alternative revenues to fund stormwater infrastructure. The other is talking about a real estate transfer tax. That's another source of revenue. We talked about the last meeting that it can produce significant
Right.
revenue streams to help cover the debt service. And this is procedurally different. And if you've read this timeline, you'll see that it would take a referendum question to get this done. So a very different approach than moving down the pathway of setting up an ordinance that just simply takes 2 readings. So more labor into this, more information to the community. If this is, and we didn't get into the details of this, we presented numbers at the last meeting about this. But likewise, if there's more desire to keep drilling on this, we can as well. Just know that this timeline's a little more specific, with some hard stops and starts.
Well, none of this requires, again, outside consultant. This is all something staff could begin the process of. At some point, you know, there's some legal involved, but
That's right.
this is all something that can be started in-house.
Correct, absolutely.
Right.
Is there any reason to start it if there, I don't know what anybody thinks about it?
Well, that's the question. If you want to, what other information would you want to see? I mean, we had general revenue expectations discussed at the last meeting that, you know, if we did at a rate of these varying amounts, we would produce a certain amount of revenue associated with that. And and I think there was at least one comment that I recall was one member said, or I'm sorry, not a, it was a board member who made the comment like, if we're going to have this conversation, maybe we only do one at a time, or we only consider one. And I guess that's a question of what is your tolerance or what is your desired pace? You know, in terms of how quickly would you like to see these stormwater improvements constructed? Are you willing to wait, right? You know, so that's
Yesterday.
yesterday. So, well, so that's a question that I think you and I have had before, Mr. President.
Absolutely. And I think that, I mean, there is a thought that I've had listening to Joy talking about staff being overwhelmed. My preference would be a hybrid solution where we can start and stop some of these items. We only say that, for example, the transfer time, the water utility fees only for a few years and so on. We could actually have something pretty complete as a hybrid solution to raise money, but it will represent a lot of work on the administrative staff. And so I think we have to be really intelligent about what do we want to take and be parsimonious to what it will take to the village to implement that item. I completely forgot about the timeline of that effect on the display.
Well, I mean, we're looking to staff to tell us, you know, given your present workload and adding these other items and the research that's needed, is that reasonable? Is that something that you think going down these parallel tracks at the same time makes sense? Or pursuing one, getting that either happening or deciding not to, and then pursuing the next?
Yeah, maybe the thing to do is to, how about we come back with more details regarding the stormwater utility fee, and then at the same time, maybe there's a level of comfort that grows with that and more understanding of the level of revenue that could be brought off, what could be suggested in terms of here's the revenue stream and here's the scale of the bond. I think all this, the stormwater infrastructure improvements we're talking about, there is this anticipation and goal to have other participation by other entities, the state specifically, right? You know,
right.
A lot of this involves IDOT. And we keep poking them and talking to our state reps and talking to the county who have hands controlling certain dollars. And the issue is the certainty with those dollars and the timing of those dollars, right? So again, that comes back to a rhythm, tolerance for patience, and you know, so that's the question. And
Right.
so so I think probably the easiest thing to do, you don't have to obviously say, you know, step on the gas to go for transfer tax today. We just wanted to show, similarly as we did with, or similar to the timeline we showed with the utility fee, is here's what it would take in terms of timing. Again, noticing there's actually more specific dates that require diligence
Right.
working around.
And I
So-
think another thing that would kind of just add a little clarity is we've talked about a lot of potential solutions for some of the stormwater issues, the deep tunnel, and then building off that, and
All the straws,
kind
right.
of just get some of those pieces out there so that we really have, here's the big pot of what we have to do at some point in time
Yeah.
and want to do, but this is what we can carve out, and these are the sources, and all these things keep changing because we don't know if we're going to be able to apply for some grant and we're going to get some funding, but they're big pieces. We just need to get some of these big dollars kind of out there again, so we can kind of see that. And then when we see, oh, this is going to attack so much of it, and this piece might attack another piece of it, it'll help us get that bigger picture. And I know those numbers are out there. We just need to be reminded
so-
of the magnitude.
So we can put it together, we'll put together an estimated, I guess, a suggested approach with the utility fee, and talk about a suggested project budget.
Yes.
To include, here's the projects because we've talked about this internally about,
Yes.
you know, here's the trunk line, then let's try to add in some straws in all quadrants of the village to try to put together a baseline project.
Right.
And then that could be scaled to the greatest degree as we can to fund with one bond issuance for a 20-year term, and then
Right.
do probably what we talked about internally is pay as you go for the other straws, and to add it in over time and say, hey,
Right.
here's how we get from A to B, and this is what it looks like in terms of timing and so forth. I think when help me out, Bettina, when we talked about it with the stormwater utility fee, the amount of revenue we thought we could generate, we thought doing the double barrel approach with the real estate transfer gives a higher level of comfort that the bond debt service is covered.
Right, so debt service based on the project numbers that we looked at, which was about 10 million, we're looking at about $500,000 payment.
Yeah.
And we looked at the stormwater utility fee running at about 225 to 250 in revenue, and transfer tax based on last year's sales, what the county gave me, we would have exceeded $400,000.
And
So-
we can't use last year.
I'm just saying, as an
Yeah, we
example
could
of
never
revenue.
use
I mean,
last
they
year.
actually went back 5 years and gave me a history,
need
which
to
was
go
in the
back
packet,
20.
but,
To be smart about it. That's what I think. The transfer tax is going to be all over the place in terms, last year was anomalous. And I think, I guess my point is.
That's
is
exactly
this
right. Yeah.
either, are we talking about one or the other or both? Because I think there's little comfort with doing both. So what I was trying to do is expedite this and say, let's pick a lane and have you focus on one, because I think we can do what we always do with anything that had to do with COVID year, take it and just chuck it out the window. We're never going back. Cranes just had an article about that today.
To your
It's
point,
deflating.
that's one of the reasons why the double barrel approach is that one thing we've seen over time is the village's ability to rely on certain utility taxes that they.
Fees.
Yeah, yes.
Peace.
No, utility tax, let me be
people
clear.
out there in
So-
TV land,
So for
so-
like telephone, and, the idea of the utility tax for that has shrunk over time.
Right,
So the
right.
idea that we're trying to have a horizon that the village can have a reliable horizon for several decades, and the idea that these things go up and down, and so the
Right.
idea of having multiple sources
Right.
to pledge would be a very conservative approach. No, the village would always be on solid ground and not have to divert resources from other activities or programs or capital investments. So that's why we were approaching it that way, to have diversified revenue streams to help support a new bond source.
Yeah, I would just correct something. I think I am comfortable with both. I think for the very reasons you're saying, the transfer tax is too variable, some feast or some famine years, and utility tax would be stable, and given some tiering of the rates at which people would pay, I would be comfortable with that as well. So I just want to make sure that you don't misunderstand. I think there's some appetite for both.
And I think that as you continue to reformulate, this is what the big pocket looks like, these are the different methods which we can attack that, I think that we'll be able to see a bigger picture, and I think
Yeah,
that would
no.
be helpful.
I'd just like to say I'm not comfortable with both.
Okay, understood.
Especially since now we're recommending full CPI for taxes this year. Like, I feel like we need to pay attention to how much we're asking people to increase their taxes and fees to the
fair.
village. So I understand that when we look at it, we think, oh, this would be a great way of doing it. What I would really like to see is all the different options, everything
Yes.
out on the
Yes,
table.
yes.
And all the different costs and how we're gonna kind of put all these pieces of a puzzle together.
Yes.
And my preference would be one or the other, transfer tax or utility fee. And if indeed we say, oh, no, we're gonna do both, I'd like to see that utility fee have a sunset.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Just
that's a
my-
good point,
yeah.
because you mentioned this earlier. COLA is almost 6%. So we're even contemplating this at a time of unprecedented inflation. So I think we have to be really sensitive to the fact that what might seem as no big deal, $300 a year, for some people, we don't think about this way often enough in this town, but we do have a lot of seniors on fixed incomes. We have to be mindful of that. And I am with Trustee Marquis. We need to see options, but I think to just haul off and say, oh, both, because we're
Nobody-
trying to minimize the impact in our minds is.
I don't think it's fair to characterize that as haul off and say both. I just
Okay,
wanted to
sorry,
correct.
that's lazy language. I'm just saying we
Yeah.
have to be mindful of the fact that we're in an unprecedented time. And so to ask people to do this is a big ask for some people. And I just think, we're talking about these numbers and we
Yeah.
need to understand.
Yes, and I think we need
Yes.
that big picture. And
The big
one final
picture
comment?
is,
I thought-
I think we should put everything on the table to see what is in front of us and be mindful, as you say, Kate, about what is in front of us, but we cannot close our eyes and just select a solution without knowing what could be available somewhere else. We need to be exhaustive and maybe select a hybrid solution for funding, okay?
All right, I think,
So we'll start with utility fee.
yes.
And bring back, so.
Yes, and once
Got it.
again, we've got the,
The
last-
ever elusive draft fee waiver minimum.
yes, and can I just say that I looked at the draft fee waiver policy,
Yeah.
and it put in your very capable hands, the ability to look at anything less than $1,000.
Which turns out it's not a lot.
But, but that's, you know, that's something. And then we also had some historical data.
Yep.
And I know Steve isn't here, but Susan, based on just looking at that historical data and, you know, the policy that's been drafted up, did you have questions of Drew? Did you feel like you were comfortable with the policy as drafted?
It's 56.
No, they're here for this.
I'm sorry, I'm pausing to get back to that
Yes.
page.
Yes, it is one of the last,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I think it's the third from the last page. To be noted that, so building fees could be waived, development fees. An exception would be reimbursement of third-party costs, so that would be borne by the applicant who is asking for a fee waiver. And the same, you know, we're not waiving bonds, escrows, performance guarantees, those types of things. So it would enable the village administrator to have that freedom for anything 1,000 or below. And then after that, the board, at its sole discretion, could review the requests, talk about it in a board meeting.
That's been the
and
practice,
a-
yeah.
As we have before. So I mean, I personally felt like this was a step in the right direction, and I felt
Yeah.
very comfortable with it, and I didn't know if you had a chance, Susan, to.
I did. The question that I wanted to ask was whether there was any provision for partial waiver. And for some reason, I thought I'd seen it here, but now I don't recall. Reduce, oh, there it is. Nothing in this policy shall diminish the village's role and authority to require, reduce, or waive fees. There's nothing. The genesis of this comment was when I was looking at things that benefit folks outside of our taxing area, right? So Jawa was, I think you raised, right? So we are obviously benefiting from Jawa, but so are many others. And so rather than waive the entire fee, we might waive a fee that's
Proportional.
proportional
Yeah.
to the benefit to the people in Lake Bluff. Is that permitted anywhere in here? Could we continue to decide to do that as a board on a decision by decision basis?
Certainly, anything over 1,000, you would have that complete flexibility to do that.
Okay,
And so we would have the ability on a board level, if one of the board members said, I'm concerned that CLC Jawa has, X number of communities, we're just one of those, and for us to waive the entire fee, they might propose an adjustment. And the same thing could be said of, the Park District isn't exactly the same as the
Right.
village boundaries. And some of the nonprofits benefit some people and not others, but, we could argue that any nonprofit benefits all. So, do you feel comfortable then?
with that kind of discretion, yes. I do.
Yes. So do we have a motion then to accept the revised fee waiver?
To recommend it to the village board?
Yes, to recommend it to the village board for them to review and approve.
So moved.
All right, second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, I think we have so concluded.
You need a motion to adjourn?
Do we have a motion to adjourn? Susan, may we have a motion to adjourn?
Oh, so moved.
Second, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Great, thank you.